Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
You ready?
Showtime.
On May 3rd, summer starts with The Fall Guy.
Let's do it later.
Let's drink a spicy margarita.
Make some bad decisions.
Yes!
Audiences are falling in love with the most entertaining film of the year.
Fall Guy.
Fall Guy?
Fall guy.
That's what the poster said.
See Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt in the movie critics say exists to make you happy.
Trying to make it out?
Nope.
Because I don't either. It's not what I'm into right now.
What are you into?
Talking.
Yeah.
The Fall Guy. Only in theaters May 3rd. Rated PG-13.
Hey, what's up, Blazer fans? Welcome to the Blazers Edge podcast, part of the Almighty Baller Radio Network. I'm Tara. I am back in the saddle here with Danny Marang. We are here to break down the first game of the Trailblazers 2018 playoff run. Didn't go like everybody was hoping it was going to go.
You know what else could use a second take right now? You know what else could use a second take? The Blazers. They could use a second take on game one.
Oh, so clever, Dan. So clearly, after last night's game, you have not yet fully processed it. It sounds like you're still hanging on.
I was drinking on live TV, okay?
So, Dan, I would like to kindly recommend my personal cure for after a Blazer game. When it looks like they're going to lose, that's when I start thinking about what I'm going to watch right afterwards to try to bring me back. And
you don't let it go, though. You don't let it go. Just get it within 10. Just get it within 10. We're sitting there watching the game with a bunch of other folks last night, Shane, Joe, and I. I go, you guys realize that they're going to get this just close enough to really break your hearts. And, of course, I got the usual, oh, come on. I'm like, this is Portland. You should all know by now.
Dan, if you can't try to make the best out of it, I don't know what you're doing watching.
Hey, you know what? I knew it was coming. I was preparing myself for it.
Well, and I was preparing myself for the exciting comeback. And you know what? They fell just short, but it turned out to be a lot closer than it looked like it was going to be for a while. But so wait, okay. So I got to tell you how I quote unquote watched the game. I was kind of one of those for a while. I was one of those blogger boys, you know, that only looks at the box scores that all the players are complaining about these days. Mm-hmm. So I was on an airplane and I landed about just after halftime or something like that. So I looked at Twitter to try to find out how the game was when my plane came in. I know. And I checked the box score. First I checked the box score, and Rajon Rondo had 14 assists and Nurkic only had 4 shots. And I was like, what is going on?
And thankfully for you,
then I turned over to Twitter and it was on fire. I thought it was just like probably the most horrible thing had happened. And it was just like, oh my gosh, it sounded awful. And then this morning, I actually went back and watched the game because I'm here for you Blazers Edge fans to do that sort of thing.
Glutton for punishment.
I rewatched the game, and actually that first quarter wasn't bad. I mean, it was like there were actually highlights in there, which I completely, missed in the Twitter dumpster fire that was going on.
Where are we setting the bar for highlights nowadays?
So Evan Turner had 9 points. He was 4 of 7 in shooting. That was he was hitting his shots, right?
That should have let you know right away. Evan Turner's got 7 shots in the first quarter. That's suboptimal. And I think the best thing about this whole game, for the most part, is that my phone was dead, so I couldn't even be on Twitter during the game.
Yeah, that was good for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So you asked about other highlights. I was looking at and trying to appreciate the individual plays because I knew how the outcome of the game was going to go. So I was trying to watch at least for something that was fun. There was this great moment. There was like 3:30 left in the first quarter, and Ed Davis was caught up in this. All I can describe it as like a whirlpool made of Davis, Mirotic, and Holiday. Like they were all surrounding him and like going around in circles, and he was under the basket and he caught it, and he somehow leapt up out of this whirlpool and dunked it. And that was awesome. That was definitely a highlight, especially for people who love Ed Davis like I do. So there were some highlights, and sure, 18 points is not how much you want to score, but the Pelicans only had 21, so it wasn't like it was like hugely lopsided or anything. Anyway, my point is, I thought that the whole team, that from what I had gathered from the box score, was that the whole game was terrifically lopsided. But like I would say, like the first quarter and a half a quarter, things were going pretty well. And then if I had to say when it all sort of started to fall apart was when the starters came back in with about 6 minutes left, I think, in the half.
Every highlight from the Blazers was met by a counter almost immediately by the Pelicans. I'm sitting here. I have the replay on right now as we're recording this here.
I don't know why you do that to yourself, Dan.
I too am a glutton for punishment. And I just saw Nurkic get just a tremendous block on each one more. And then everybody just kind of stands there and watches the ball. Mirotic grabs it and throws it, whips it around behind his back to a wide open Jrue Holiday in the corner who cans a three. Blazers come down. Evan Turner scores in the post on a fantastic move. And then the Pelicans come right down. The Blazers get a half a stop. Anthony Davis grabs the rebound, kicks it back out. The defense falls
Kevin
asleep.
Calabro, you can stop now.
The defense falls asleep, and they just toss a lob right over the top for an uncontested alley-oop for Anthony Davis. It was just like, oh, the Blazers made a play, and the Pelicans scored. Hey, the Blazers made a play. Oh, and the Pelicans scored.
Dan, I'm going to cut you off.
It's just brutal.
You've wallowed in your misery enough. We're going to keep it going, but it's going to be a more organized look at your misery. We're going to just lay it out piece by piece. We're going to pick it all apart. So let's start off by talking about the things that we talked about just a few days ago about what we were going to be looking for. I wanted to look about what to watch for in game one. You wanted to talk about it as, a whole series, but there were a few things that we discussed keeping our eyes on. And one of them was pace. So in this game, so Portland in the regular season, to recap, was 19th in the league in pace. They were at 98.8, basically, possessions per game. And the Pelicans were the fastest pace in the league at 102. So this game turned out to be 99.3. So closer to Portland's pace than the Pelicans' pace.
Yep.
Discuss.
Yeah, I think that's what kind of we anticipated, was that it would slow down to the playoffs, but still faster than probably most teams. And that's really kind of what it came down to. And the Pelicans, at the end of this game, almost spelled their own doom. What made them so good, in a sense, was every time the Blazers slowed it down and worked a possession to score, the Pelicans came down and drove one pass, layup, dunk, or three. It was rinse and repeat. So every time the Blazers did something, the Pelicans came down quickly, attacked, scored, and took away every bit of momentum that Portland had. So it wasn't necessarily about the pace of the game. It was the pace that the Pelicans opted to play. They let Portland slow it down. But then they were like, you know what? Make or miss, we're going to push. And they did. And they pushed very opportunistically. And what I think hurt them and allowed Portland to get back in the game is they started playing the prevent offense with like 4 or 5 minutes to go. They put the brakes on, and that allowed Portland to really get into it. I would assume and expect...
What do you mean by prevent offense?
They milked the clock.
Just like stop. Okay.
They stopped trying to attack early. They were trying to run the clock down, but I think they started doing that way too early. Because if you do miss, now you're giving Portland more time. And now Portland's getting the line and getting free throws. The clock stopped with even more time on the box, or more time on the clock. And it almost screwed them, to be honest. But as far as the overall pace of the game, I was okay with it. If Portland was actually hitting a shot or moving the ball more than once a possession, things could have turned out a lot better. And that's more than just Dame could have been better or CJ could have been better. The offense in general just didn't look good. It didn't look good at all.
So Dame and CJ were not hitting their shots. Do you think they were not hitting their shots because they were having an off night, or were Pelicans playing them in a way that they were forcing them into bad shots that they couldn't make? Because both those guys are pretty good at making bad shots.
Yeah, no, Dame and CJ are probably two of the best bad shot takers and makers in the entire league.
Yeah, we've talked about that before.
The odds will come back every now and then and bite you, but I don't necessarily think that was entirely the case. You have to give credit to Jrue Holiday. He put Damian Lillard in handcuffs. He made him work for everything. I think there was 2 different times where Jrue went under the screen, And Dame took those opportunities, but all night long, Drew was fighting over the top and forcing Dame downhill, but forcing him downhill into Anthony Davis.
So if he was spending all his time concentrating on Dame, why didn't CJ have the ball more?
CJ did, but he was catching the ball, and then everybody just kind of stood around. And then you're driving in to help defense. The Pelicans, this is kind of what we were talking about going into this game. They were perfectly content with letting Evan Turner get off. They were perfectly content with Al-Farouq Aminu taking shots. Anybody not named Dame or CJ was allowed to take shots. And the problem was the Blazers just could not capitalize. I mean, Connaughton came in for a stretch and looked decent. Then he cooled off. Same for Shabazz. Aminu couldn't hit anything. Collins came in really rough. I mean, you just kind of go up and down the board. The only guy who was really consistent all game long was Ed Davis. And even he had some rough stretches.
Well, Jusuf Nurkic didn't get very many shots off. I said, when I landed, he'd only had 4 shots.
And it was 7.
Why was that? Was that because they couldn't get it to him?
There were a couple times where this is kind of what we talked about with the pick and roll. And here's my biggest beef with the game last night.
There wasn't much pick and
They
rolling.
went away from the pick and roll a ton.
There wasn't much pick and rolling.
It disappeared. It was there early on. Nurkic was catching in the paint and making the right reads, drawing the defense, kicking out to the open guy, and then there was no follow-up, or the ball was being stagnant after that. The reset wasn't there. Nurkic did blow some bunnies inside. He did well enough on the offensive rebounds to kind of clean up a couple of his own messes, but other than that, he struggled inside a little bit. Finished 3 for 7. That's just not going to cut it. Portland had 4 or 5 guys. 4 guys with 7 shots, 1 with 8 and 1 with 6. Zach Collins should not have more shots than Jusuf Nurkic. That stood out to me, and I wasn't quite sure. Well, and also if you look at their playing time, let's see, Jusuf Nurkic played a little over 24 minutes. Zach Collins played 21. Ed Davis played almost 20. Yeah.
So it was pretty well spread out amongst the centers. Jusuf Nurkic wasn't really in. I mean, he ended up with 3 personal fouls, but I never felt like he was particularly in foul trouble. And you know how I like Jusuf Nurkic, who's in foul trouble. So I personally thought, because this is another thing that we talked about last week, was keeping our eye on Jusuf Nurkic and how he was going to be really important to the game, and seeing what playoff Jusuf Nurkic did. I felt like he wasn't fully engaged this game, and I'm not quite sure why. And I'm hopeful, because I don't think he was like, if he had been fully engaged and this had been the result, I would have been more worried. But I didn't like, he wasn't dunking, he wasn't running with the same leaning forward like he does when he's into the game. He just didn't seem as into it. And I don't know if he was having nerves or what did you see out of Jusuf Nurkic's play?
Offensively, he looked unsure of himself. Defensively, I thought he was okay. People were worried about him covering Anthony Davis on the perimeter. Anthony Davis shot 4 of 11 outside the paint. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly okay with that. When he did do some damage inside, Davis, that is, a lot of it was not on Nurkic. It was on Al-Farouq Aminu. It was on Collins. It was on Davis.
Davis.
Yeah. So
it seemed like most of the time that Ed and Collins were in, Collins was on Mirotić.
Yeah, and the times that Nurkic did get beat by Davis, I remember the one play where AD caught it on the move, went left-handed behind the back to the right, and just beat Nurkic to the spot. Anthony Davis is going to do that. He's going to make you look dumb on a couple possessions. You just kind of have to deal with it. And I think Nurkic realized immediately that
he just had to accept that.
Yeah, and I think he realized immediately that he overplayed it. And I think he was anticipating a little bit of help from the baseline. But it wasn't there, and that's the game of basketball. Like that's the superior player capitalizing on a mistake or a slow rotation. Overall, Nurkic's defensive effort was good, not as good as I wanted it to be. Offensively, subpar for sure. Wanted to see some more from him, but again, a lot of that is going to be dictated by the pick and roll and getting him the ball. And there was a couple times where he worked down low for the mismatch in the post, and he got looked off. There were a lot of things that just went wrong for Nurkic on a lot of his reasons that were kind of out of his own hands. That's not to absolve him of his shortcomings and his mistakes in that game, but he needs somebody to get him the ball.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's what I kept wondering is, were they just not able to get him the ball? Was it simply a lack of pick and roll? I mean, what other plays does he have in his toolbox besides the pick and roll?
I mean, that's what he lives on.
Because he doesn't do a lot of cutting. He doesn't, he's not super mobile. He does always have that. He always has that one long mid-range shot that he takes from just inside the 3-point line.
He did take that one
game.
where he literally
has
stepped in, and I'm like, if you're gonna take that shot, dude, just stand right there where you caught it and take it.
He does that once a game, like clockwork.
That one shot was frustrating me, and it was like I didn't mind the shot itself, but to just take the three, it just come on, man.
So do you have any ideas about why? So we talked about this before we hopped on about how the starters for the Pelicans played a lot of minutes. Anthony Davis played 40, Giroux played 39, Mirotic played 39, Rondo played 39. The highest player on the Trailblazers was, of course, Damian Lillard, and then CJ was 37. But then Evan Turner was down at 30. Aminu was down at 30. So there was a larger distribution between.
The Pelicans relying on their
Trailblazers players. Yeah. So what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that it's, a shorter rotation like that? Do you think that it's likely that the Blazers might shorten up their rotation? Or do you think that the Blazers are going to be playing a bigger number of players?
No, I think.
Do you think that they just tried some stuff this time and now they'll bring it in?
I think they'll stick with kind of what they've gone with. I would rather see Nurkic out there more. I think he has the ability to give them more, obviously, than what he gave them last night, but more than either Collins or Davis, because Collins and Davis have their role. There's no doubt about that. But neither one of those guys. Collins has had, 3 double-digit scoring nights all season? Ed Davis has had a handful. But those are the kind of things that you appreciate when they happen, but you're not counting on them. Nurkic is the guy you're supposed to be counting on. Mm-hmm. And for that to happen, he needs to be on the floor, and he needs to be a part of the offense.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand if it's the first half and he's gotten 3 quick fouls and you need to sit him for
extenuating
a little bit longer.
Circumstances, exactly.
But he hasn't been getting in foul trouble. Nope. And speaking of fouls, there was a kind of an interesting game in terms of that there were not a lot of free throws taken. No. Especially notable, Damian only had 2 after, what did we say? He'd been getting 10?
Yeah, nearly 10 a game.
And on the Pelicans side, Anthony Davis had 9 and Jrue Holiday had 1, and nobody else had free throws.
Yeah, there was a lot of whistles being swallowed.
Teams, right. Well, and were both teams also, I mean, I couldn't tell the level of physicality, because I didn't feel like it was like there were, fouls being committed all over that weren't being called. I felt like it just wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't a physical game. Obviously it was a playoff game, so they were playing, but at the same time, it didn't seem like they were getting in each other's spaces as much as I would have expected with these two teams.
It wasn't like Knicks Heat. It wasn't like Knicks Heat in the 90s type playoff.
Do you think that's how the whole series is going to go?
Yeah, it's going to be. It's a playoffs. It's going to be physical, and if you get the right group of refs.
But it felt not very physical to me.
It was. There was a lot of grabbing. There's particularly a lot of grabbing.
That one Rondo foul that he had, where he was basically committing 2 fouls at the same time on Nurkic, where he had his arm. He was just grabbing his arm in those claws, and then he had his arm all the way around him.
You're talking about the one where he tried to go back up for the dunk, right?
Yeah, Bruce Ely caught a beautiful picture of it.
Yeah, there was a few people at the bar that were like, "Why didn't he dunk that?" I'm like, "Because Rajon Rondo's trying to pull his arm out of his socket."
Yeah, he had. You could see his arm, his hands just digging into his flesh.
Yeah, no, he was pulling the big man down with every. That was a playoff foul. I mean, that's exactly what that was.
Yeah.
Like I said, it wasn't
just seemed like there was a low number of them.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd rather the game be called like that. I really would. There were a couple bad calls, but nothing egregious. I'd rather the refs just let them play, because I don't think any team really benefited more than the other. And that's kind of how I like
That's
to see
what
a
you
game.
want.
That's what I want to see it officiated. Just call it the same both ways, whether it's calling everything or calling nothing. Personally, I'd rather them call nothing. Just kind of let it go unless, it impacts the play. That's kind of always been my mantra with that. But part of that, though, is also on Damian Lillard. He didn't want to go to the rim. And I know why. I mean, Anthony Davis was a monster in there.
Right.
The Pelicans had 12
Which you
blocks.
want to?
I mean, Rondo had, or not Rondo, Mirotic had 4 blocks.
Holiday. Oh, Mirotic, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
And Holiday had 2. I mean, they got some long arms in there. And it was, there was a deterrent. Dame was facing 2 guys every time he got downhill. And when he kicked it out to shooters, guys were hesitating to shoot or they weren't taking the shot at all.
Or they were just missing.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the story of the night. It was not good. It was what we kind of expected to happen as far as New Orleans' game plan. I just figured Portland would react better to the game plan.
Do you think it was a matter of them not reacting? You think it was they didn't react? You don't think it was just off shooting nights from the 2 stars and not
it was an
adapting
off-shooting
fast
night,
enough?
But it devolved into really bad basketball for long stretches. One pass, dribble in one spot, and then take a contested step back to fade away. Like it's just, I literally just watched a possession where CJ took it off the first pass from Napier, caught it 2 feet inside the 3-point line on the left wing, in and out dribble, step back, fade away with a hand in his face. I mean, that's just, and it was like this for long periods of time where it was one pass and a contested shot. They didn't work to get to the rim. They didn't work to get each other open. They weren't working to make the extra pass. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing I'd ever seen, but it had a hint of defeat in it.
So I saw it differently. There's no big surprise. But then again, I watched it knowing what the outcome was. And I actually, after I went back and watched, especially that first quarter, there were a lot of good things about that first quarter. I don't know what happened to make them fall off the rails in the third quarter, but I saw a lot of things, and I thought that the Blazers, I thought that the Pelicans played the Blazers pace, and isn't that what we would want to see? I mean, or are you saying that the Pelicans were able to and they just toyed around with them and play like, yeah, we're going to play your game? I felt like it was one of those situations where, like, earlier in the season, the Blazers were doing the same thing over and over and over again, and it wasn't working. And then later on in the season, they were doing those same things, but they were working because they'd done them over and over again and they'd finally got them right. And I felt like this was one of those games where they were doing all of those same things that they've always done. And like they were, like I feel like the worst thing could have been if they like completely changed the plan.
I felt like they at least changed the plan. I just think they needed to stick to the plan because I know I've been a proponent of the ISO ball scoring because there are times when it is very valuable.
Oh my God, there were 2 Aminu ISO scores that I loved so much.
You talking about
again?
the
I'm finding those little moments.
The 3 that he hit when he looked off Nurkic wide open underneath the rim with nobody around him for 5 feet on each side, because that play drove me nuts. Granted, he hit the 3. If you're talking about the straightaway 3, granted, he hit it, but it was the wrong play. Nurkic is literally jumping up and down in the paint with nobody around him. Anthony Davis is caught in between. Do I run out at Aminu or do I cover Nurkic?
The one that I was thinking of was not a 3.
Okay.
There was another one where he completely lost the ball, and it was one of those wonderful, beautiful butterfly moments where it was just absolute chaos, and he lost the ball, and everybody was diving for it, and he came up with it, and he ended up getting it in. But you know me, I live for those.
Yeah, it just, even in the comeback, it wasn't great basketball as far as an execution standpoint.
Right. So how do you feel that things could be different if the Blazers have Maurice Harkless back?
Flexibility, for one. You put Turner back with the bench, Harkless with the starters. I don't know if Stotts will do that because Harkless has been out for a little while. And, I would expect that Harkless is probably back for Game 3, almost certainly Game 4 now. From what I've been able to kind of piece together from interviews from Harkless and releases from the team, it's kind of, I think, what they're looking at. So God. Just, again, game's on in the background. CJ got caught up in the air with the ball.
Stop watching it, Dan. You're supposed to be paying attention to me, not the game.
It was just something that happened a few times last night in really inopportune moments. Drew Holiday came up with that steal on the open court on McCollum, and I just saw one where he jumped up in the air with Anthony Davis guarding him and almost lost the ball there, too. I think there was 2 other times. He did that a few times, and that's just really weird from CJ because it's almost kind of a panic move. And that's just so unlike him. And that's why I think that where when I said it was almost kind of a defeatist idea, it seemed like their first move didn't work, and they didn't know what to do after that. And I know they had a game plan in place. It's just I think they expected to come out and dominate without actually dominating. And when that happened, mentally it took a little bit of a toll. Because it devolved into really, really bad basketball there for long stretches.
I think you're exaggerating how bad it was. But, you have more experience watching the game than I did. And there certainly wasn't beautiful basketball, but I don't think it's the worst I've ever seen.
I didn't say it was the worst I'd ever seen. I said it devolved into really bad basketball.
Really bad basketball.
It was. I mean, you don't get down 19 in the playoffs playing good basketball. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just kind of the craziness behind it. And here's the wild thing. We talked about pace and effectiveness and scoring early and easy opportunities. Did you know the Blazers actually won fast break points?
Hey, well, there you go.
I never in a million years. They didn't win much. And we were talking about it earlier. I forgot to mention this. The starters, the battle of the starters, the Pelicans won points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks, and they shot better from the field.
So were there any categories that the Blazers won?
Turnovers.
Offensive rebounds.
Turnovers. They had 2 less.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
But the bench, how about the benches?
The bench was kind of the exact opposite. The bench won in points. Okay. They won handily in rebounds. Assists, steals, blocks were even. Turnovers were even. They got outshot field goal percentage-wise, but that was it.
I'm curious. I would love to go back and look at a large sample size set to see how teams in the playoffs who play a large rotation versus a tight rotation, like a lot of players versus very few players. I'd love to see like a historical study of if there are any patterns from that.
Well, there's things you can glean from it, especially like later into the playoffs and later in series when the legs get a little heavier. But this is something that they do.
When you have a bigger bench because you play more players, over at the end of the year, if you're playing in a long series, does having those fresh legs make a difference?
Yeah, and I mean, the Pelicans played last night without Okafor. Solomon Hill only played 5 minutes. Jake Diallo played 10 minutes. I mean, Darius Miller played 14 minutes. Basically, everybody else, Ian Clark, I think, was the next highest after the non-starters at 25. So you had 40, 40, 39, 39, 27. So, right. I mean, these guys are just getting a breather on, quarter breaks and stuff like that to kind of extend the break. And that was it.
Right. Well, I'm hoping that the Blazers' deeper bench will prove to be useful to them. That's kind of what I was getting at. But you were also talking about how long some players played. There was one player on the Blazers who played 12 seconds. You want to talk about that play?
Okay.
I know you do.
So I know a lot of people are. Let's call it what it is.
A lot of people were very upset. Would you like me to?
No, we're gonna go ahead and call it pissed off because that was the reaction in the room. That was the reaction on Twitter. That was the reaction pretty much everywhere I went when everybody's like, what happened? What were they thinking? Why did they do that?
I think what you're trying to say is at the very end of the game when the Blazers were down, were they down 3?
They were down 3.
It was very surprising that Terry Stotts put in Myers Leonard, who had not played the entire game, and they put him in, and he ended up being the recipient of the play, whether or not the play was run for him. He ended up being the one who got the ball or was supposed to get the ball and ultimately was not able to because Drew Holiday deflected it. And not only was it an odd play because it was Myers Leonard who'd been sitting the whole game, but also they went for 2 when they were down 3. So people were very upset about that.
And
what's your reaction?
They weren't going for two. Brian Freeman and Eric Griffith put up a post about the exact situation on Blazers Edge earlier today, and it was something that a lot of us kind of hammered through in the Blazers Edge Slack channel. I was okay with the play per se from the what was diagrammed point of view. If you watch the play back, the play isn't designed for Myers. Myers is coming up to set the screen for Damian Lillard on the flare. Mirotic cheats. Holiday plays in between, and Holiday makes a phenomenal read. All Myers is doing is diving down to try to pull somebody away. Hope somebody breaks coverage and give Dame one-on-one coverage. And Myers cuts in the back cut, and it's a good cut. Giroux just makes a great play. It's literally what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Well, so they broke it down in the article saying basically that the options for sending for the center at the time were to send in Nurkic, who sets a great screen, but he can't stretch the floor, to send in Collins, who doesn't set a great screen, but is more likely to be able to stretch the floor or is more of a threat from three, or to put in Myers,
who can set a great screen,
can set a screen and can stretch the floor. So when you look at it like that and go, okay, he seemed like the right person to be in. Although I hope in the future, moving for other games, that Stotts will give him a few minutes before the very end of the game before he puts him in.
Myers didn't do anything wrong. Jrue Holiday just made a phenomenal play. And we haven't talked enough about what Jrue Holiday did in this game. Anthony Davis scored and Rondo put up the assist, but Jrue Holiday was the best player on the court last night. He was a two-way nightmare. He was everywhere, making every big play all night long. He was an absolute monster. And that play, followed up by the block on Pat Connaughton, were just examples of how valuable he is. And yes, it shows up in the box score as a block. But everything he was doing all night long was just right place, right time, all the time. And it was just beautiful from a basketball standpoint. From covering the Blazers standpoint, man, did it suck to be on the other end of that.
So how do you crush that beauty when they meet again? What's the game plan?
Jrue Holiday's going to do Jrue Holiday things. He's 6'5". He's got a 7
We got to come up with a different phrase for you, because you're all Ed Davis does Ed Davis things, Jrue Holiday does Jrue Holiday things, Aminu does Aminu things. We got to come up with another catchphrase.
No, you can't take away what these guys do. You're just You're trying to minimize these things, and with Jrue Holiday, you're going to take away Jrue Holiday's defense. You can't strip that away. You're going to take away Jrue Holiday's leadership ability. You can't take that away. You're going to take away his 7-foot wingspan. You can't take that away. The only thing you can hope to do is make everything more difficult for him. And I think the way you do that is, one, put him in the pick and roll and beat the hell out of him with Jusuf Nurkic. Wear him down. If he's going to play 40 minutes a night, let him take 30 screens from a 280-pound dude. That'll slow those legs down. That'll slow those legs down big time.
So, but do you think that wasn't in the plan? I mean, like, why weren't they able to execute that? Because, why weren't they able to execute that? Why was it not in their plan? That's been their bread and butter all year.
I don't know what happened with that. I think part of it has to do with the fact with how the Pelicans were playing it, and they were bringing Anthony Davis and Jrue Holiday, two enormously long defenders, to take away Dame's sightline and pressure him when the pick did come. And they weren't getting the results out of the pick and roll off the kickoff pass from the roll, when Nurkic is rolling down the middle to the kick out, to justify continue running that set, I guess. And Nurkic wasn't delivering when he did get inside. So I guess they
tried it a few times, and it was just like, this isn't working for us tonight with these players in the way they're playing us. It's just not going to happen tonight.
A perfect example. The play that just happened on the floor right now. Damian Lillard runs the pick and roll with Zach Collins. Zach Collins dives down. Davis and Jrue trap Lillard on the left-hand side. They leave Al-Farouq Aminu directly above the break. He should have shot the ball. He didn't. Collins is open, but between Aminu and Collins is Anthony Davis. All 7 foot and 7'1" wingspan, or 7'2" wingspan, whatever it is. And
it might as well be 16 feet.
Yeah, Aminu throws a sloppy pass, and Anthony Davis gets it, steals it, generates the break, and Etuan Moore goes down the floor and scores. So I can understand why going to the pick and roll and doing what they do well, if your bread and butter is being taken away because you have an all-world defensive player in not only Anthony Davis but Drew Holiday, you've got to either find other wrinkles to the pick and roll or guys that are your secondary guys, Al-Farouq Aminu, Evan Turner, Maurice Harkless when he returns, Connaughton, Napier, those guys. They've got to make the shots. They've got to make the plays out of it. And that's always been the key. That 13-game winning streak for Portland was because the secondary guys did things. There was no hesitation. There was no making the wrong read. There was no lazy passes. It was guys in a groove off of Dame and CJ doing what they do best, putting it on a plate for these guys. And that's always going to be the catch-22 with this Blazers roster. As long as they have these secondary guys that are a big fall from Dame and CJ, it's going to be a problem. I mean, here we go again. Pick and roll with Zach Collins. Dame dribbles to the left, takes a contested shot. He had either wanted to get himself going and take the shot, or he just had no faith in Zach Collins because of the play before that. I mean, Collins was wide open above the break, but before the 2 plays before that, Collins had missed a wide open 3, so Dame's trying to get himself going. So, like I said, I think for me at least, it comes back to things weren't working, so they kind of devolved into I don't like to use the word, but that's what it felt like the entire time I was watching it, is they kind of had a defeatist mindset. Like, they'd taken away what we do. Now what? And you just kind of, this whole idea of now what was just emanating throughout the game.
So, but at the end, when they did mount the comeback, are you considering what you said earlier, are you saying that comeback was as a result of the Pelicans misjudging and slowing things down too much? Or were there things that you saw the Blazers were doing where they got it back together in order to be able to close it out and at least get it close?
As always, it's a little bit of both. The Pelicans slowing down, I think it was a very bad idea. I understand, again, why coaches do it, but it's more... It's an entrenched
their
idea.
thing is that they play at the fast pace.
Yeah, and
so it seems risky for them to slow things down that much. I mean, the Blazers, unless they're the ones choosing to slow it down. I think the Blazers did succeed a bit in slowing them down, but I think it was to the detriment of their own rhythm.
Well, the Pelicans, and not just the NBA, but the NFL is the perfect example. The reason, the old adage is the prevent defense, or in the NBA, prevent offense. Only thing it does is prevent you from winning, because it gets you out of what got you there in the first place. I understand milking the clock, but you have to be better about when you milk the clock, because they went to it way too early. That allowed Portland to take a few more risks offensively because they knew they had more time. As far as them doing some things, I think a lot of it came down to Dame, first of all, hit a couple big shots that energized the crowd. CJ started to hit a few threes, and that defeatist mentality, that kind of seemed to fade away. Guys were working a little bit harder on defense. They generated a few steals. The one obviously that sticks out is the one where McCollum got on the fast break and got caught up in the air and turned the ball over. If he makes a play there, instead of turning the ball over and getting caught up in the air, we may be talking about a different result. And as bad as this game was, because, I'm all about the silver lining. Of all the crappy things we've talked about tonight,
don't try to make it your thing, Dan. You don't get to claim the silver lining as your thing.
It's full on sarcasm. Come on now. But even with all of the crap that went on, as bad as it looked at times, they lost by 2.
Right.
I mean, okay, granted, let's go ahead and call it 5 because, part
CJ's
of that,
3 at the end.
CJ's 3 at the end. All it did was close the margin of defeat there. But, I mean, it was a one-possession game down the stretch. And execution, and as much as people want to beat up on Myers and Pat, those guys did what they were told to do. And I don't have a problem with how the plays Stotts ran. The Pelicans just had a better defensive plan in place. And then on top of that, the Blazers dug that hole, Kerry Stotts did not dig that hole. The Blazers did with really poor execution. And then, again, down the stretch, really, 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 really head-scratching plays by McCollum. CJ had 2 of them where you're just wondering, what are you doing, dude? One on the turnover and one on a really bad shot. And the Pelicans capitalized. Mirotic hit an unreal shot. Drew Holiday hit an unreal shot. Anthony Davis, I think with like 4 minutes to go, got free for an alley-oop on the break to kind of rein things back in. That's what we were talking about earlier, the momentum plays. The Pelicans just had an answer seemingly all game until that final stretch, and they, again, came up with the answering plays, all 3 of them from Drew Holiday.
The crowd seemed like they were great, and which is why it's kind of a bummer. There's many reasons it's a bummer. Well, down the stretch they were.
Early game they were okay. Mid game there was a lot of guys sitting on their hands. There was a lot of people that were in the room that were not thrilled with the way the crowd was. First time you're opening at home in nearly 10 years. That place should have been just burning an hour before tip off.
How come Trailblazer fans don't put on their free T-shirts? That was one thing that I noticed.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yeah, they're getting too good for it. And maybe that's part of our problem. Portland, embrace the free T-shirts. Put it on over your $200 button-up shirt. I don't care.
I feel like that might have helped. Yeah. I'm hoping I am going to game 2. So if there is a free shirt, I mean, I understand if you have your little like awesome boutique handcrafted, hand lettered, house made,
cover that up too.
Shirt. And you want everybody to see it. But when you're sitting in your seat in the arena, it looks good. Like I was watching that OKC, man, they know how to wear their T-shirts. Their crowd does some cool things with the standing up until the first basket goes in, and then wearing their T-shirts.
Thing. Yeah.
So I think maybe if the crowd could help out with that would help. That would be a good thing.
On the crowd too much, but maybe I'm misremembering, but. Like my formative years with the Blazers and the deep playoff runs, I always go back to this one example because it'll be forever burned in my brain. When the Blazers played the Jazz and Karl Malone busted up Brian Grant's eyebrow, that place was so loud during that series that I'm there with my dad, and I had to cup my hands and scream to talk to him next to me. I had no voice at the end of every game. Because that place all night long was just, you had goosebumps from the sound in there all game long. It was a different level of just rowdiness. And I'd really like to see that happen. Was it at the Memorial
Coliseum?
No, that was what, year two of the Rose Garden, I think. Was that 96, 97 or 97, 98? It was one of those 2 years. I can never remember. But maybe it was because people knew how big that matchup was, and it was Stockton and Malone, whereas Rondo and AD or Drew and AD doesn't quite have the same appeal to it. But again, I'm not poo-pooing on the fans here. I want to see a little bit more from them in that aspect.
Right, because when the fans get behind the Blazers really do usually show up for
they
them.
Feed off them. That's a real thing. There's no doubt in my mind, and they're not just playing to the crowd. On the post-game interviews when they say we we feed off the fans. They do. You can see it.
Yeah, they really did. And I don't remember seeing a lot of the Blazers maybe at the end when they were making the run where they interact with the crowd and they tell them to get louder and stuff, that always gets them going. Well, I want to ask you before we go about anything you want to comment about any of the other playoff series going on right now. Any big surprises that you want to talk about? I mean, I know we had the Pacers defeated the Cavs today, but especially in the West. Did you? Good for you. Good job.
Yep. I still think the Cavs win the series, but if it goes to 7, I'm giving it to the Pacers to upset on the road. Or excuse me, not on the road.
Are they a 3-6 match as well?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. but they're 3-1.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Exactly. I didn't expect the Spurs to lose as badly, but that series is probably going the way that I anticipated it. People are saying why I didn't want to play the Thunder in the playoffs. Paul George, 8 of 10 from 3. That's the kind of guy that there's a reason why everybody's like, the Thunder Blazers are 4-0 against him. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Paul George and Russell Westbrook can each carry a series by themselves, and they're both on the same team.
But why was Melo at the post game interview?
Because he's still Melo.
I couldn't figure that out. I do not understand Carmelo Anthony.
Okay,
I do not understand him.
Here's the thing: if you're a reporter, who would you rather talk to, Carmelo Anthony or Russell Westbrook?
I would rather talk to Russell Westbrook and Paul George.
Ooh. You really are a glutton for punishment. I have no problem with PG.
I want to talk about the game. I don't want to sit there and look at Carmelo Anthony.
I don't want to talk to Russell Westbrook ever.
I don't know.
No, thank you. But yeah, no.
He could say something interesting, and you'd be there for it.
No, I just don't care what he has to say more often than not. But as far as the playoffs going, obviously the old adage of it's not a series until the opponent wins on the away team's floor. Well, it's a series here in Portland.
Yeah, you know what? The Blazers didn't mess around. They were like, they need to have that chip on their shoulder again, and they need to be going back to being the underdogs. I think it served them well in the past, so hopefully it'll serve them well in the future. Yeah,
I still think Portland's going to come out and win game 2. The keys to the games in the series from game 1 still remain the same. They need to dictate. They can't give up what they do well. They can't
So go back to the pick and roll.
Go back to the pick and roll and make them pay. That's how you make them change their coverage. Make them pay what? By making the right reads, making the right plays, or go to the counter. Dame's going to have to split a double team and make them play up higher. Now, when they start playing up higher, the passing lanes and the angles get better for Dame. Just slight little adjustments are all they need to make that, and timely shot making. It wasn't
make your shots.
It wasn't like every shot was contested.
If one more of those threes had fallen.
Yeah, it wasn't like every single shot was contested last night. The Pelicans played good defense. It wasn't the world-beating defense. Drew Holiday played phenomenal defense. AD played phenomenal defense. The rest of the guys were serviceable. So beat those guys, Force a switch. Force something to happen. Again, that's about dictating. And if you can't dictate in the playoffs, you have no business being there.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope that they are able to do it. Again, going back to, I don't think the whole thing was a disaster. I saw a lot of good things at the beginning. And then, like you said, even with the poor performance in the most of the second half, the Blazers were able to close it out and not win by that huge of a margin. They were able to be right in it right at the end. Do you think overall the Blazers, it's hard. I know the answer, what you're going to say to this question, so I have to think about it a different way.
Oh, no.
Do you think over a 7-game series, the Blazers are the better team?
Yeah, I do.
I think they are, because I think they learn and apply. I think that
the Pelicans have less room for error.
Learn and apply.
Everyone wants to talk about how the drop off after Dame and CJ is drastic. Well, yeah, it is. It's not that drastic because it's Nurkic.
Scoring wise.
Yeah, but for the Pelicans, it's AD, Drew, Rondo, who?
Right.
They're in the exact same position with less depth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why Anthony Davis has to be
options too.
Yeah, because they don't have
Blazers
any wing help either.
Multiple defensive options
on the interior, not so much on the perimeter of the wing. But that's not necessarily a problem with the Pelicans because they don't really pose a perimeter threat at the 2, 3, 4 outside of Mirotic or AD if he slides down to the 4.
So you've got Aminu covering the middle, or covering the centers. So you don't need him out on the wings. So you can send him into AD and
I'd rather have Aminu on Mirotic.
I consider Aminu a wing defender.
He doesn't really. He plays on stretch fours more often than not.
Okay.
He's not typically. The Blazers, especially without Harkless, haven't been utilizing him on the perimeter.
Mo who's actually usually the wing defender.
Yeah.
Come back, Mo.
And that's a huge thing because of the versatility that he gives you. But yeah, I mean, overall, it was a disappointing game. Not just the loss, the way they came out. That was why I hit so heavy on our preview. I wanted them to come out and establish dominance, establish pace, establish how the series is going to go. And
I felt like the first quarter they did.
You can't establish anything when you're down after the first and you've scored 18 points.
Okay.
I mean,
I guess. I guess so. I don't know. I get that.
I mean,
but there were highlights, Dan. There were highlights.
Like I said, Evan Turner getting 7 shots in the first quarter that plays right into the Pelicans' hands. That's just not a thing.
Here's what I think is going to happen on Tuesday. I think Nurkic wakes up. I think the sleeping giant wakes up, and
I sure hope so.
He goes for like 24 and 15, and that gives the Dame and CJ go back to more. I mean, I don't think they're going to have, I don't think either of them necessarily is going to go off because I think it's going to be a struggle for them this whole time. But they're going to get closer to 25, and Nurkic will have a big game because I feel like that's the biggest difference that needs to happen is that if he's slamming two-handed dunks or even I would take a one-handed dunk. If he's dunking the ball and with authority and he's, roaming the paint, I think the Blazers have it. He just needs to, he's got the jitters out. He's got the nerves out. This is a first real playoff game he's played. I think once he comes on full bore, then the Blazers are going to be fine. I just hope it happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah, they can't
have to play too much catch up.
They can't screw around. They need this game desperately. Desperately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they got it. They'll rise to the occasion. And I won't even need to be doing just get it to 10 because I'll be saying we need a bigger lead. I'll be saying run up the score. That's what's going to happen.
I would be for that. All for it.
Well, Dan, this has been a truly depressing chat with you this evening, but I've tried my best. I've tried my best to think of my own silver linings because I'm going to just keep going back to there were highlights. It wasn't like the game was without highlights, and it wasn't like it was a giant blowout at the end. So the Blazers were able to put some things together, and I do think that they have the advantage of the fact that they have been through a lot together. They can talk to each other. They can call each other out. There was an article from Jason Quick today about Damian and CJ and the conversations that they were having immediately after the game. They were texting each other and being honest with each other about what they thought they should have been doing better and how they felt good moving forward. So I think all these things, I think the team is going to be fine, but it would have been nice to start off with a big old blowout win. But we didn't get it, so we'll have to settle for one in game 2.
Whatever.
So anyway, for Dan Marang, who's not helping me at all tonight.
Hey, you know what? I do want to end this on a good note because I've got the official.
You're going to talk about something else, right? Great. Now you're going to talk about Blazers outsiders. You can't ever talk about our stuff in a positive, happy way, but when you bring on the outsiders, you're all peppy.
Yep, and then when I'm on when I'm on Blazers outsiders, I talk about Blazers Edge glowingly. That's kind of how it works. I just kind of go back and forth.
I'm still waiting to see that episode.
Oh my God, it's just the shade. It's just so bad.
You'll be sending me the highlights so that I won't be.
I'm on the show. I don't need to cut up. I don't need to cut up edits.
Have your people pull the highlights and send them to me of all the glowing things that you say.
They're on Twitter and Facebook. They're out there. But we do have
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. We have the Blazers viewing party at Miniman's Baghdad Theater on Hawthorne for Game 3. That's Thursday, April 19th. Starts at 2:30, going all night long. Rip City Radio will be down there with the pregame. I believe Travis and Chad will have the lead up coming into that. And then Blazers Outsiders will have your halftime show live there with Shane Brennan, Joe Simons, and myself. They're going to be doing all kinds of stuff out there. It should be a big old shindig and hoot and whatever this is they say down in Nashville where Tara's been.
Yeah, where it was a lot more peppy.
A little bit of a hootenanny. Was it a hootenanny?
Oh, God. It was so much fun.
But, yeah, no, come out there. Come watch me be miserable as the Blazers win because I can't have nice things.
Or alternatively, they can come find me in a corner rolling my eyes at you, having a very positive and fun time.
Whatever.
Because I will be there as well. But I'm not important.
You are important, Tara. We all love Tara.
Thank you, Dan.
Everybody send Tara love on Twitter because she's not feeling love right now. That's at TCB-Biggs. Send her all of the love. Hopefully we can see everybody out there. We'll be out there all night. And then as we've talked about, or as I've talked about in the podcast, Blazers Outsiders will have your post-game coverage throughout the playoffs, Fallen Talking Ball. So we'll be there, win or lose, until midnight on these late nights.
Oh, man.
I got to tell you, doing a show after a loss
Be
at
careful
midnight,
what you wish for, Dan.
it's just splendid. Let me tell you.
Well, I hope for your sake and for all of the Blazers fans' sake that the Blazers will deliver and take us into the second round. So for Dan, thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you soon.